Is a session on designing to the objective. We're going to talk about differences in instructional design for knowledge-based versus behavioral learning objectives. My name is Deila Bumgardner, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to engage with people, so I left this. This is kind of just prompts for you to do on your own, and I'll answer them from my perspective, but I encourage you to think about these questions specific to your own experience. So this is actually not me. That's a picture of my daughter, because when I was doing gymnastics, there was no digital photography. But I want you to think about a time when you truly enjoyed learning. For me, that was when I was in gymnastics. That was a time that I really enjoyed the process of learning new things, new skills, excuse me, that sort of thing. And my motivation, this is me and a teammate, was when we had fun competitions, specifically one where we got to go to Disneyland. So I was very motivated to learn new things, to get the skills that I was going to need to achieve an ultimate goal of qualifying for a state competition that would be held near Disneyland. So with that, this is where I'm coming from as far as the being a subject matter expert on this topic. So the majority of my career has involved training in some way, whether it was coaching gymnastics or all the way through teaching high school and ultimately settling into a career in instructional design with a couple of stops in medical education. I learned actually, ironically, a lot, I think, about learners from my very first instructional position, which was coaching gymnastics. And as you can see, I listed out the different levels of gymnastics that I taught. And I think that was the first time that I really started to think about how I had to change the way that I taught based on the learner that I was teaching. And I'll come back to that. The majority, if not all of the content that we're going to go through is from my time at Stanford. I began at Stanford working for the continuing medical education office, educational technology office for the School of Medicine, and currently the Department of Emergency Medicine for another couple of weeks. And the types of projects that I have worked on at Stanford are, here are some examples of them. We've built a lot of online self-paced CME activities, a really fun podcast, a couple of podcasts, but one that was specifically morphed from being a intended learning experience, intended course into a podcast to better serve the needs of who we were teaching, which were patients. And so the podcast was the format that we chose to impart the information. A lot of interactive and story-based or case-based online activities, and some other trainings that were meant to be used in simulation environments, as well as certification training. So I've kind of dabbled in a lot of different formats of training. So for you, for those watching, please feel comfortable and free to ask questions at any time. Ratish will be able to, I think, forward those questions into the meeting chat for me so I can address them as they come up. So do not feel like you have to hold off. If you've got a question, please feel free to ask it whenever. I am not a huge fan of the learning objective starter of by the end of this training, you will be able to. I like this. Through this learning experience, you could be inspired to. So from the end of your participation or engagement, hopefully in this learning experience, I'm hoping that you will be inspired to write actionable, measurable, and learner-centric learning objectives. We're also going to cover how to categorize your learning objectives as knowledge-based or behavioral, and how to design learning experiences with, how to design learning experiences and interactive design and the assessments that align with the learning objective, verb, and category and the type that you have aligned with. So to start off, we're going to kind of go back to basics. Learning objectives, verbs matter. This is this is something I think I talk about in every talk I give and every training I give when I'm working with junior IDs, is that when you sit down to write a learning objective, the verb really, truly matters because it is the foundational, the cornerstone that you're going to use to make sure that your learning objective as a whole is actionable, measurable, and learner-centric. Learner-centric specifically calling out that it is something the learner can understand, but more importantly, the learner can see themselves achieving. Speaking of understand, it is not understand. Understand is not your go-to verb. I see it all the time in learning objectives. And the reason we don't like understand is because that's very difficult to measure. And it's also very difficult for a learner to gauge their own achievement in. I don't know what I don't know. How do I know if I understand this properly? So instead, there's a link that's been shared. This is one of my favorite tools for cheat sheets, if you will, for Bloom's Taxonomy's learning objectives. And it's a list of what kind of learning and what kind of verbs associate with that overarching category of learning. Knowing, comprehending, applying, analyzing, synthesis, and creation. And then below it, I also loved a little bit of a indication on, well, if you're going to write a learning objective around knowledge or recall, well, here are some strategies that you may want to employ when building your learning material. So these teaching strategies you can go back and forth. Let's say for some reason you are already bound to a certain teaching strategy. Well, then just know that these are the most likely verbs that are going to associate with a kind of experience that you're creating, and vice versa. And also down here calling out this concept of these are the ones that are lower order thinking and these are higher order thinking. We'll come back to that concept. I zoomed in a little bit on this so you could see what some of these verbs are. The learner also usually appreciates you mixing it up and being very specific. Like, what do you really want them to be able to do or to want to do after they have engaged with your learning experience? And then close up also on these teaching strategies. But please download this document, save it, use it, love it. It's fantastic. All right, so now we're going to move on to the design strategy, the design process. Many people may have heard this analogy before. It's used, it was made famous by a professor who gives a lecture trying to help people understand how to prioritize what they give attention to in their life. This concept being that if you have a jar and 3 types of things to put in it, sand, pebbles, and rocks, the order that you put those things in is going to affect how it fills the jar. The sand represents filler activities, things that are not really that important to your life. Think social media. The pebbles are things that are important, but you could live without. You don't necessarily need them, but they're important to you. They bring you joy. And the rocks are the most important things in your life, your family, your friends, your health, your stability, those things, the things that facilitate those. So if you put all the sand in first, you're not going to be able to fit as many of the rocks or the pebbles if you fill up your time and your energy. Versus if you start with the rocks and put those in first, give those the most attention, then the sand and the pebbles will fill in the space in between and you'll have a fuller life. Well, for us, designing a learning experience can follow a similar concept, a similar format. Your learning objectives are what identify your rocks. If you let your learning objectives tell you what's the most important things, put those in first when you're building a curriculum. Get all of those onto slides if you're building a presentation, into your outline, into your syllabus, whatever the case may be. Make sure you have dedicated space and time to those things first. Then go back through and your bullet points or the things that support those learning objectives, those are your pebbles. The things that give them context, the things that give them ease of application, and the things that spark retention. And then the data, the supporting evidence, the funny jokes, the anecdotes, all of those things, that's the sand. You fill that in after you've made sure that all your priorities are met and that your learner is able to focus on the rocks and the pebbles. So let's see, nothing in the chat so far. For a knowledge-based learning objective, we expect our learner to acquire new knowledge. That's the modus operandi. The Learner is usually also expected to increase their comprehension of a subject or a topic. It's very seldom, I think, in higher education and in medical education that we're starting from complete scratch. Somebody has already gone through a significant portion of their education. We are building on other subjects and topics that they have been exposed to in the past. So we're increasing their comprehension in many cases. We're also expecting them to think critically and analyze that new knowledge that we've given them to acquire and to integrate it into their prior knowledge. When we have a behavioral change-oriented learning objective, the learner is expected usually to start or change a behavior. They are often asked to demonstrate that new or changed behavior under observation. So there's some pressure to perform. And they're also going to need to apply that behavior to either a new practice, depending on where they are in their education or training, or an existing practice because we are asking them to do something differently. So let's give some examples. This is, and I'm not advocating that these are perfectly written learning objectives, but they were taken from other materials in various stages of development. So very simple. What would you say? List the difference between recessive and dominant genes. Would you say that's a knowledge-based or a behavioral-based learning objective? Knowledge-based. If that's what you guessed, that's correct. This is a simple information recall and regurgitation. What about explaining the difference or explaining the effects of gender-affirming communication on patient care? You're asking someone to qualify, quantify the effects of a specific activity. Also knowledge-based. No behavior is being changed. While it could be argued that giving an explanation is a behavior, this does not have to be done by performance. This could be written, this could be just mental. It's not necessarily a behavior. But when you take it another step and your learning objective is to offer your pronouns when you introduce yourself to a patient, okay, this is action. This is something someone needs to do when they perform a task. So that's a behavioral learning objective. I used the mask as an indicator on this because I think that's another great example of that we all remember. That was a behavioral change that we were trying to enact at a global level. And I want you to kind of also maybe think about that when you see some of these concepts and understanding why certain strategies are or aren't effective in teaching people behavioral change. And the last one, we want you to feel good, or we would like the learner to feel good about engaging with patient-centered care initiatives. This is not exact from materials, but it's very close to materials that I've worked on. When I work with a subject matter expert, one of the things during the learning objective writing phase is to really ask them, what are your motivations for the learner? What do you want them to walk away with? What do they get out of this experience? And this was initially designed to be a very knowledge-based approach. But then they said, I really need people to feel better about this. There's a misconception that these initiatives are going to be painful for them to engage with, and it's going to cost them a lot of time, and it's really not. Okay, well, that's actually a behavioral change. You want them to react differently, to approach the initiative or the topic with more enthusiasm and less fear. So you're asking them to change their behavior. Okay. I'm moving pretty quickly because I want to be sensitive to time, but I would remind you, if you do have any questions or comments, even they don't have to be questions, please feel free to put them in whatever format is available to you, and Ratish can move them into the meeting chat. So I was a film major for my undergraduate studies at San Jose State, and one of the texts that we read that really resonated with me was called On Filmmaking by Alexander McKendrick, who taught at the Cal Academy of Arts. And his focus on the early stages of filmmaking or his advice to early filmmakers was to focus on process and not the product. Don't get bogged down thinking about your final film. Really engage with the process of making the film. Focus on your journey. With the experience being the process that you're going through. and the journey that you as a maker are going through, or in our case, as a learning designer. Arts and aesthetic matter. This one can be tricky and it does apply to learning design, but the bottom line is visual aesthetic does matter. It does not mean it has to be Pixar or fine art, but it shouldn't distract or detract from someone's ability to engage or pay attention. And in doing that, in spending the time and the energy to give that part of the process its due, you tend to foster joy and engagement in that experience for a learner. Also, allow for creativity and problem solving and creative problem solving. This, ironically, I think is even more applicable when it comes to learning design than film design, because a learner and an instructor creatively problem solving together is a really strong form of engagement. And then when you focus on the process, you ease pressure off the outcomes. Someone's focus is now on the creation and not the final product. So there was one comment that I would say feeling is an attitude, but not observable. We need to clarify a behavior that would be indicated as an attitude. It's a good point. So that learning objective was definitely attitude oriented. When digging deeper with that subject matter expert, we really kind of narrowed down that they wanted people to not just feel differently about it, but engage. They wanted to see people signing up for these initiatives, talking about these initiatives with positive attitudes, spreading accurate information. So we kind of parsed it down more from where you saw that initial learning objective. But yes, there is a difference between attitude and behavior, one often preceding the other or supporting the other. Okay. And glad you mentioned the importance of art and aesthetics. Oh, I am an artist first before I came into instruction, so it's one of my nerdy passions. So with process, not product, kind of giving these some context to these concepts. When you're focusing on the journey as a learning designer, you're focusing, this is the time that you spend on pedagogy and tools. What am I going to use to build this experience? When it comes to art and aesthetics, this is sometimes as simple as attention to detail. Did you put these pictures, images, colors, fonts, movements in with intention? That's really the simplest breakdown I can give you, is be intentional about what visuals you associate with your instruction. Fostering joy and engagement, I think, often takes the form of interactivity. How does someone engage with your materials? And it usually is some form of interaction, whether that's a simple question and answer, or a multiple choice question, or a pause point can even be an interaction. I call it the Dora method because it was always amazing to me. I think it started with Sesame Street, but with my children, it was Dora, and it would be the cutest thing to watch them watching this show, and Dora would ask a question and they would respond out loud. Dora's going to move forward regardless of what my child says. My child could be in the other room. Dora's not going to change. So that method of just pausing to allow someone the opportunity to engage, even though it's not going to change the outcome. It's not going to be a choice-based necessarily interaction, but it does make the brain stop and process. And allowing for creativity and problem solving, that's the same, very similar, giving people an opportunity to be a problem solver. One question that came in is, within CME, the supporter pharma company wants specific outcomes, how to address those? I'm going to keep going, but if you don't mind, can you be even more specific about what do you mean by specific outcomes, how to address? Could you possibly give me an example? And then maybe I can give you a focused answer. So knowledge-based learning experiences tend to be rooted in these three things. We see these the most often: lectures, self-paced online learning, and literary learning, reading books, assigning a book to somebody and expecting them to acquire the knowledge from reading it. The reason we do that for knowledge or lectures are that this is dedicated time in a shared physical or digital space. A lecture obviously does not have to be in a lecture hall these days. The lectures are, as we are right now, in a digital space as well. With access to a subject matter expert and to your classmates for collaboration, those things are going to become really important as to what makes a lecture effective or not effective. The fact that you need to capitalize on the access to the subject matter expert and encourage collaboration with peers. Self-paced online education, which is a niche that I have definitely spent a lot of time developing materials for. It's usually LMS content online found asynchronously by a learner to access at their leisure. But some of the benefits and the things that you can use to your advantage as a learning designer are the fact that you've got learner tracking in a way that you probably wouldn't in the physical space. You have digital assessments. You can get feedback as a designer on the way that people are interacting with your materials, the way learners are interacting. And you can provide constant access to supporting materials and references. Whereas in a lecture situation, once the subject matter leaves the room, then that access is often cut off. Literary learning is just vetted expert content that's extremely accessible, self-paced, with very low instructional overhead. For knowledge-based learning experiences, I would not advocate that just assigning somebody a book is going to impart that knowledge, but it does serve as a still very valuable support experience. Now, for behavioral change learning objectives, behavioral-based learning experiences, you've got simulation. Oh, 4 minutes left. That went fast. Simulation, microlearning, and gamification. I'm going to encourage you guys to look at these later because I want to get to something that's a little bit more important since I've only got 4 minutes, which is the science of the brain, neuroscience of how a brain learns and retains. And I'm going to fly through this. The brain is encoding, so sensory input is super important. And this is something that applies to both knowledge-based and behavioral learning objectives. The more you engage with the senses, the more you capitalize on the brain's likelihood of retaining information. Storage, this is the one that's, I think, most important to the differentiation between the two. Let's jump down to declarative versus non-declarative memory. Declarative memories are personal experiences, fact, and knowledge, and the way that the brain processes those memories. You want to be keeping that in mind when you're designing an activity. Non-declarative memory are how we store skills, habits, and emotional responses. Emotional response and behavior are attitude and behavior are directly aligned. You will have a very difficult time trying to separate those out. Consolidation, you can look at that later. That's more about how the brain is processing changes. But retrieval, being cue dependent or recall, cue dependent association with cues or triggers, very, very helpful for behavioral knowledge. And recall and recognition is definitely something associated with simple knowledge-based learning. Practice, extremely important for behavioral learning objectives because that repetition, especially spacing the repetition out, is what maximizes long-term retention. Adaptation, we're going to skip. Okay, so building declarative memories. I don't have a clock. I can't see the clock. Building declarative memories. If you're going to design and assess for those memories, you want to use varied methods of presenting the information. That's how you're going to help someone retain that knowledge, by giving that knowledge in multiple ways and repeating it. Frequently giving them an opportunity to teach it back or to answer questions. And people call it chunking. I hate the term, but I call it information portioning. Rather than throwing a bunch of information at somebody, you want to move it into obviously identifiable and recallable portions. And then mnemonics is another one that I feel like frequently is very simple, and we know it from grade school, that gets overlooked in higher education. Give people an opportunity to have that cue-based, joyful mnemonic response to something. All right, so assessments for knowledge-based learning objectives usually look like multiple choice questions, matching or association, and allowing someone to teach back information. Non-declarative memories or are what we're creating when we're trying to incite behavioral change. For designing and assessing those, you want to use strategies like role-playing, simulation, debriefing, having these open discussions, creating experiences where you're engaging in multiple sensory inputs, giving immediate feedback, and most importantly, consistency over time. Okay, I suspect I'm very close to being out of time. Where's my clock? Yep. Okay, so I brought these back up. I will just leave you with this little nugget of information from what I've built for the Continuing Medical Education Office. We have the benefit of getting a lot of feedback because we do our post-assessments. And what we have learned is that medical learners want case-based learning, whether it's knowledge-based or behavioral learning objectives. Framing it in case-based learning is what they want, it's what they react to, it's what they feel gives them the best learning experience because they get immediate context. It encourages discussions and collaboration with their peers. It develops clinical skills just by proxy, the fact that you are modeling those skills. It's an opportunity to model those skills. And you are creating a whole picture for practice and application, plus critical thinking through the evaluation based on their own prior experience allows them to engage a little bit better. All right, I think I am out of time. Thank you for listening. This is my email. Please feel free to reach out if you have any